Thanks, Desiree, and thanks, colleagues. Very valuable inputs from everyone. I'll try and be brief. Lots have already been said, and so I'm going to try not to necessarily repeat, but suffice to say, when looking at the role of media during a crisis or epidemic, we generally think of three elements in terms of communications. There's, of course, the government and government communications. Then there's your traditional mainstream media, and of course, social and community media as well, which I want to also speak to a little bit in more detail. These are usually identified. Government communications is about press conferences, official websites, and insisting that there needs to be taglines on websites during pandemics, and of course televised addresses, which we've seen to play quite an important role as the President of the Republic took the nation into confidence and kept us all informed as to the decisions, and a real sense of transparency as to why certain decisions were taken in terms of the lockdown, hard lockdown, and so on. The traditional media is, of course, your newspapers, television, radio stations, and of course, mainstream websites. And then, of course, there's your social media and community media, which is your social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, and so forth. And of course, your community radio stations and print media. Now, during a crisis, we talk of a command culture, which a lot of former and previous speakers have spoken about, structured communication that gives clear direction for people to actually adhere to. And so the media needs a society in different crises, there must be mature management of information. And I think a number of people have actually commented on this. Gugu spoke about it as a public broadcaster, but also Jessica and of course Ms. Kalonda, to talk about responsible information sharing. And so, if we have structured and trustworthy information, then people tend to follow it. And I think with the setup of the Command and Command Council on the COVID pandemic here in South Africa, that is in close liaison with the cabinet, it gave a sense that information that was shared with the public was indeed trustworthy and so on. And of course, the normal roles of media in reporting, investigations, and so forth, in order to not diminish the importance of holding people accountable, particularly government and so on. I also think that from the three channels that we find, who act very differently, of course, government communications becomes a trusted source of authority, provided that it demonstrates transparency and, of course, retain trust within the process. Your traditional media, we find that with regards to the source is usually very critical, which is a good thing. But at the same time, we are saying that there needs to also be a balance with supporting government in getting the necessary information done, because it is so critically important, the sharing of information. Then, of course, social media, which is the unknown in the equation, and Fatima spoke a little bit on this in terms of the issue of disinformation, and I'll come to that a little bit later. Now, of course, when we talk of the why social media in particular presents us with challenges, firstly, that they are structured for personal interest, and not social interest per se. It is individuals or individual groupings that are trying to communicate particular messages. And they can give momentum to stories in unpredictable ways. We've seen it, for example, in a different context, Black Lives Matter and other protest forms, but meaning that, you know, media consume is not always what we want or what we know. And this is sometimes a problem. It can also enable antisocial behavior, facilitating the propagation of rumors, including misrepresentation and identity issues, false and manipulated information, images and sounds. We see it all the time where an image is used to depict a current situation, only to find that it's actually an image of 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and has actually no direct relevance and bearing to the current situation. And then, of course, there's cyberbullying, coercion and harassment that also takes place on your social media platforms. And needless to say, not all the time, but in many cases, privacy is breached by social media. And so in a time of crisis and pandemics, it's really not the kind of issues that we would want to deal with when we try and communicate facts. We also have to acknowledge, in as much as there's the antisocial, they also support positive social behaviors, creating and distributing new social norms through social media. For example, the point that Ms. Kalondo was talking about, which is about masks and social distancing, sanitizing, washing of hands, that also finds very much emphasis and expression through social media. Naming and chastising undesirable behavior, as Fatimata was mentioning, you know, everyone with a cell phone is a journalist. And so when people are not behaving, when they are smoking or drinking or breaking the rules, social media platforms are also used to expose, chastise, and name and shame such. So that is a positive. And then, of course, it serves as discussion forums, you know, where people feel that because there's a huge grouping or network on the platform, they can actually serve as discussion points. The challenge is that there needs to be maturity for some users and, of course, state regulatory framework to actually try and regulate how we begin to capitalize on the positive outcomes of social media. Now, in order to respond better in future, we have to appreciate a few things with regards to the sharing of information or the media. Firstly, around popularity. Celebrities, government agencies, well-known organizations can indeed have an influence and make sense of information that is being shared. Network-based content influence, which is about hardwired into a group or being an accepted member that is actually contributing to like-minded groups. I think that's critical. And as I said, one of the key issues is that information must be true, correct, and trustworthy. You know, if there's incorrect information or misinformation or forbid disinformation, these are all types that to discourage people to then begin to follow and actually abide by what is being said. There's the last one, which again, before the last, familiarity with the preferred definition of reality, social norms, values, and beliefs. You know, we have a melting pot of people and cultures, and we need to be sensitive to that in terms of how we bring information across, even during pandemics. And then lastly, the perceived trustworthiness. Most of the factors all contribute to a greater or lesser extent to whether we can actually trust the information, trust the organization, and so on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that a new social compact needs to really come out of these three channels of communications. From a government communications point of view, I'd like to say that we cannot wait for a crisis to work with media and to foster relationships. That needs to be an ongoing phenomenon, to have built good relations and make that the norm. Through one of the ways is consistent press releases, consistent press conferences. We've seen it in many other countries where it's not just about topical issues, but that there needs to be a continuous flow of government communication to mainstream media as well as community media. Your traditional media need to continue with high quality investigative journalism, but at the same time, whilst we embrace that, it mustn't be seen to be confrontational. We have seen too many times during this pandemic, Desiree, that mainstream media only wants to concentrate on sensational stories. Of course, no one is saying you shouldn't report on corruption. That must be done. But I'm sure you'll all agree that it went way beyond that in terms of wanting to make sure that we throw the whole process into the balance, because we are only concentrating on the sensational. One other example I should mention is around the ban on cigarettes. There was a faux pas in terms of the communication thereof between the minister and the president, and for weeks that was the main story, let alone the fact that people were fighting for their lives and going hungry and so on. And then, of course, from a social media point of view, it is the improved regulation that I'm saying is needed, because people.
Dr. van Heerdan.
Yeah.
I'm terribly sorry to come in here, but as a news person, I'm tempted to invite you to engage further on this, but I'm afraid the time allocation I had asked all our participants to allow us for is really come to an end. Can I ask the administrators that we distribute your presentation, and I promise I will use other avenues to take this conversation further.
Okay.
But